What is the trashiest thing you've ever witnessed? Story 1. Downtown Tempe on New Year's Eve, about 15 years ago, we were walking back to our cars after midnight when we noticed some police officers surrounding a big green electric junction box. As we got closer, we realized it was two completely naked homeless people, a man and a woman. They were having sex behind the box, determined to finish despite the police presence. When they realized the cops weren't willing to intervene while they were in the act, they started waddling around and waving to the growing crowd as if it were a parade, with the man still thrusting like his life depended on it. The situation escalated. Mace was sprayed, batons were used in an attempt to separate them, and yet the man seemed determined to finish the job. Finally, a taser was deployed. Both of them collapsed face first onto Mill Street, like sacks of concrete. As far as I could tell, the woman got tased through their connection. The whole ordeal lasted around 15 minutes. To this day, I'm both scarred and strangely entertained every time I think about it. Story 2. I'm a paramedic, and one day we got called to an active maternity case. As we arrived, we saw 4 cops outside, absolutely losing it. That's usually a sign something really messed up is happening inside, because normally cops are thrilled about maternity calls, imagining medals and press releases. Inside, we found a 5th cop, a female, standing in mute horror. The mother was standing there with the baby on the floor, not breathing, the umbilical cord still attached. In her hand was a lit crack pipe, smoke still rising. As we walked up, the placenta fell out, which for those who know is a clear sign this wasn't her first rodeo. Later, we found out it was her 7th baby with father number 5. My team started working on the baby, while another crew attended to the mom. It turned out she had been smoking crack all night and hadn't even noticed the baby was blue. Then came this gem of a conversation. "Mom, isn't my baby beautiful? He's that color because his father is black." My partner, a legendary smartass, replied, "Honey, unless his father is a Smurf, he's not supposed to be that color." We managed to stabilize the baby, getting him ventilated and set up with an IV. The baby improved quickly. While I prepared him for transport, my partner went back inside to retrieve the placenta, only to have to fight the woman's massive pet rabbit for it. The baby recovered fully and was placed in foster care. Story 3. When I was a preteen, I ate some bad food at a restaurant. We went to Target afterward, and as soon as we walked in, my stomach turned sour. I ran to the bathroom, and the cycle began. Every 5 minutes, I had to go again. Eventually, I told my parents to go ahead and visit other stores and just come back for me later. About 10 minutes into this nightmare, I heard people coming into the bathroom. I thought, great, now they're going to hear and smell this disaster. I hoped they'd turn around and leave, but instead, I noticed 3 pairs of feet enter the stall next to me. 1 female, 2 male. To my horror, these people had a full-on threesome in the Target bathroom stall next to me, while I was battling my own gastrointestinal apocalypse. The smell coming from my side of the wall was straight-up death, but it didn't seem to deter them. I never saw their faces, just their feet. But it's still one of the most bizarre experiences I've ever had. Story 4. At a college party in an apartment, a stunning girl, maybe 5 feet tall, showed up wearing Daisy Dukes and a halter top. She walked around drinking, then suddenly shouted, "Somebody sleep with me." One guy struck up a conversation with her, and within 2 minutes, she dragged him into the bedroom. About 20 minutes later, the guy emerged with a big grin on his face, a scene not uncommon at parties like this. But then, from the bedroom, she called out, "Send another guy in." Everyone froze, looking at each other, unsure what to do. There were around 15 guys and nearly as many girls at the party. Eventually, she came to the doorway, completely naked, scanned the room, and pointed at a random guy. "You, let's go," she said. He followed her into the room. This pattern continued. She ended up choosing 8 different guys over the course of the night. By the time she got to the last few, she wasn't even closing the door anymore. The final rounds were especially wild, as she stood in the doorway visibly showing the effects of her night undeterred. I managed to avoid being chosen by staying hidden in the kitchen, watching cautiously from behind the cabinets. After finishing with the last guy, she casually walked out, dressed in her shorts and halter top again, grabbed a cup of party punch, and left as if nothing unusual had happened. Later, I learned she was only 16, a local townie, and apparently this wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. Story 5. When I was 16, my mom joined a group for single professional moms. She was invited to an event the next evening, a screening of First Wives Club at a historic theater. The organizers had arranged for local firefighters to volunteer as ushers, greeting attendees with a rose and champagne before escorting them to their seats. It sounded classy. But you asked for trashy, not classy, right? Stay with me. Since my mom didn't drive, I dropped her off and promised to pick her up in 2 hours. About 40 minutes later, I returned with my little brother, only to find a crowd of police and onlookers outside the theater. My mom had called earlier, saying there'd been an incident and that I needed to come get her. This was before cell phones, so we approached a police officer who escorted us inside. The scene was something straight out of a comedy. A dozen or so well-dressed, slightly bruised, and very drunk middle-aged women in handcuffs, surrounded by pissed-off and disheveled firefighters. Apparently, some of the group had overindulged in the free champagne and asked the firefighters to demonstrate how quickly they could suit up. The men obliged, but that wasn't enough. The women decided they wanted the firefighters to strip down completely and became very aggressive when the men refused. When the cops arrived, the lobby was chaos. High heels were scattered, hair was mussed, clothes were torn, and alarmed firefighters were left scratched and bewildered. These men were trained for burning buildings, not drunk women tearing at their uniforms. The officer led us to a side office where my mom and a few other women had been hiding, embarrassed but thankfully uninvolved in the worst of it. We left quickly. For years afterward, whenever my mom tried to scold me, I'd bring up the time I had to rescue her from what can only be described as a drunken firefighter harassment orgy. Story 6. It was late at my local dive bar's karaoke night when the bar owner, an outspoken 75-year-old woman in a pink cardigan, showed up with her 2 granddaughters, both in their early 20s, heavily drunk, and dressed for a night out. The scene started when the grandma approached a quiet guy near the entrance smoking a cigarette. They exchanged a few words before heading to the alleyway next to the bar. Meanwhile, one granddaughter hiked up her skirt, squatted right on the sidewalk, and started peeing. The other granddaughter ran around the corner screaming, "Don't sell coke to my grandma, God damn it!" From the alley, grandma shouted back, "Shut the F asterisk 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 up, B asterisk 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 asterisk. It's my birthday and I'll do what I want." When I'd had enough of the madness and went inside, the bartender was trashed and handing out free doubles to everyone. Story 7. I once attended a wedding in rural Pennsylvania. It was a lovely ceremony at a golf course, but the reception ended at 10 p.m., so we decided to continue the party at a local bar we'd visited the night before. I was with 3 friends, all of us in typical post-wedding attire: dress pants, rolled-up sleeves, untucked shirts. We arrived at a place called the Bear Moose Inn, a small country town bar. As we pulled into the parking lot, my headlights lit up a couple, mid-act. The girl was bottomless, with one leg still in her jeans, bouncing on top of the guy in the middle of the gravel parking lot. They didn't seem to care they were in full view of the driveway. When we went inside, I immediately realized we didn't fit in. This was the type of bar where the parking lot couple would have been the least out of place. It was a humbling experience. Story 8. About 3 years ago, I visited Vegas with friends. One of my buddies invited his university friends, turning our group into 15, 20 people. They told me hotel arrangements were handled, so I didn't worry about it. Big mistake. Upon arrival, I discovered there were only 2 rooms for all of us. The plan was for everyone to party so hard they wouldn't care where they crashed. That didn't work for me, so I booked a separate room. A guy named DJ, one of my friend's friends, decided to split the room with me. While everyone else partied, I decided to explore the casino and call it an early night. DJ took his key card and left with the group. Around 5 a.m., someone knocked on my door, but I ignored it, assuming DJ would use his key. At 8 a.m., loud banging woke me up. Through the peephole, I saw 4 police officers. Panic set in. I wasn't close to DJ, and as an immigrant working in California, I feared the worst: drugs, trouble, deportation. I opened the door, and the officer politely asked, "Do you know DJ?" The hallway smelled awful. When I looked down, I saw a large, smeared brown stain near the door. The officer explained, DJ had been arrested for public intoxication. He'd been given something at a party, likely drugs, lost his wallet and phone, and somehow made it back to the hotel. Locked out of the room, he urgently needed a bathroom but didn't make it. Instead, he defecated outside the door, stripped naked, and wandered into the casino, covered in his own mess, looking for water to clean himself. Hotel security chased him down and he was restrained until the cops arrived. The officer handed me DJ's belongings in a garbage bag, reeking of vomit and feces. After they left, I sat on the bed, staring at the bag, questioning all my life choices. Story 9. Last night, I was scrolling through Facebook when I came across a relationship status update. My 27-year-old brother and his 18-year-old girlfriend were engaged. They'd only been together for about 6 months. Naturally, I clicked on the post to read the comments, and that's when the real show began. At first, it was the usual congrats. And is this real? Type of stuff. But it quickly spiraled into chaos. One random guy commented, "You better look after her or I'm coming for you." My brother, ever the charmer, replied, "I'm not giving my all to someone who doesn't care about me. I'm not going to sit here and be asked for money and told I'm loved, then dumped 5 minutes later. Isn't this supposed to be an engagement announcement?" Then the child fiancé chimed in, "WTF, C asterisk asterisk, you forgave me for that esh asterisk asterisk. You want to dump me because I was with my dad? Do we TF? Asterisk." From there, they devolved into an all-out war in the comments, airing every dirty piece of laundry they had. Screenshots of text fights started pouring in, with my brother saying things like, "WTF, I want to have babies with you, bubs," in between pictures of dogs she'd sent him. The cherry on top? He had proposed to her via text with, "Will you marry me, babe?" followed by diamond ring emojis to make it official. I found all this out because they decided to post these screenshots in the comments of their engagement status for everyone to see. By the time I checked again later, the girlfriend had deleted me as a friend, changed her status to single, and erased the engagement post entirely. Possibly the shortest engagement in history. Story 10. About 10 years ago, I bought Britney Spears tickets for my girlfriend at the time. The PI-SAT dolls were opening, and although I wasn't a fan, she didn't have many friends and asked me to drive and go with her. Reluctantly, I agreed. The concert was fine until I went to the bathroom. Being one of maybe 10 guys in the entire venue, there was no line for the men's room. When I walked in, I was greeted by the sight of dozens of young girls, pants down, using the urinals, sinks, and whatever else they could find as toilets. They all looked up at me, smirked, then went right back to what they were doing. I noped out of there and asked a staff member if there was another bathroom I could use. Thankfully, they obliged. Now I'm stuck with the memory of walking into a Britney Spears concert men's room turned chaotic, pantsless free-for-all. Story 11. When I was a boot in the Marines, a few buddies and I rented a hotel room in San Diego to party off base for the weekend. 2 of us went out while the other 2 stayed behind, saying they'd meet us later. They never showed, but we had a great time and headed back to the room afterward. When we opened the door, we found our 2 friends double-teaming a very large, toothless woman. Her retainer with fake teeth was sitting on the dresser next to the bed. It was obvious they'd hired her off Craigslist. One of them immediately ran to the bathroom in embarrassment, while the other casually looked at us mid-act and asked, "You fellas want in?" The woman smiled, sans teeth, and waved us over. I walked out without a word, hailed a cab, and went back to base. The bonus? A few days later, I confronted them about the incident at work and asked if they'd at least used protection. They both said no, but assured me it was fine because as long as you wash your D off with Listerine afterward, it kills 99.9% of germs. True Marines. Story 12. This happened in my city, Manchester, at a busy precinct filled with bars, pubs, restaurants, and a cinema. The Printworks, if that rings a bell. It was around 8 p.m. on a weekend, so the area was packed with families, kids, and people just going about their evening, not necessarily out to party. There was a large club nearby, the name of which I can't remember. Outside the entrance, which was still technically indoors, there were the usual bouncers and a small crowd of people. As I passed by, I noticed a visibly drunk girl with her arm around a guy. To my disbelief, the guy was openly fingering her right there in front of everyone. They weren't even trying to be discreet. It was as blatant as it could get. Dozens of people walked past, shaking their heads, but the 2 of them didn't seem to care at all. The guy, clearly proud of himself, was laughing like a caveman while his equally trashy friends cheered him on. The girl looked completely unfazed, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. It was one of the most brazenly trashy things I've ever witnessed. Story 13. When I was 13, I lived down the street from a dive bar that eventually got shut down, for reasons that will become obvious. One winter day, I was walking to the store and passed by the bar. Parked outside was a pickup truck with a little 6-year-old kid sitting in the passenger seat, waving at me. Suddenly, the bar door flew open, and a woman stumbled out, screaming at the top of her lungs. The bartender, this place didn't even have a bouncer, was trying to usher her out calmly. She was yelling, "You can't tell me how to spend my child support money? If I want some goddamn whiskey, you give me that whiskey, you limp dead piece of shh. I would have given you the best gummy I've ever given." The bartender didn't respond, just led her out to the curb while someone else called for a taxi. But this lady wasn't about to wait. She stormed over to the pickup, shoved the kid into the passenger seat, climbed into the driver's side, and peeled out of the lot. She was swerving all over the road and nearly caused a 6-car pileup as she sped off. When I got home, I had a lot of questions for my mom about what I'd just witnessed. Story 14. In high school, I went to a party hosted by some people I knew had a few screws loose. I arrived about an hour in, and things were already chaotic. One guy was completely wasted, stumbling up to every girl at the party, and practically falling on them as he tried to make out with them. He did this to 4 or 5 girls within half an hour. Surprisingly, most of the girls were into it, and only stopped when their friends intervened. Eventually, this guy decided to tackle the birthday girl, the host of the party, and start making out with her. This pissed off another guy at the party who had a crush on her, so he got angry and punched a hole in the wall. Instead of fixing it properly, the group collectively and drunkenly decided to cover it with a cowboy hat pinned to the wall. Problem solved, right? I had never been to a high school party before, so my plan was to smoke, drink a little, and see how things unfolded. But I had no idea how to process all this, so I just perched myself on a half wall and observed. Somewhere between the guy punching the wall and the cowboy hat solution, the birthday girl and the drunk guy disappeared into her room. When she eventually came out, she was completely naked, casually putting on a robe as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the guy who punched the wall was sitting on the living room floor, drinking every bit of alcohol in sight to numb the pain from his broken hand. When the birthday girl saw the cowboy hat covering the hole, she stopped, lifted it, screamed, "What the F?" and then yelled at the guy responsible. Right after, a song they liked came on, and all the girls started dancing. At this point, the guy with the broken hand started grinding on the birthday girl, and before long, they were going at it right in the middle of the living room. He began fingering her on the floor while the rest of us just stood around like it was no big deal. I ended up talking to a few people nearby, pretending this wasn't happening 3 feet away. For context, I was very high and had taken about 4 or 5 shots of something, so I was just going with the flow. At some point, the guy with the broken hand stopped mid-act, asked for gum because his mouth tasted like pee, and then they kept going. That's when I decided it was time to go home. Story 15. My wife worked at a bar restaurant, and their Christmas party was legendary. The drinks flowed freely, the giveaway gifts were top-notch, and the night devolved into absolute chaos. Early on, I saw 2 waitresses making out on the dance floor, which quickly escalated to one of them going down on the other under the stairs. Not long after, I caught a cook and a bartender double-teaming a hostess in the bathroom. It felt like every corner of the party had its own R-rated drama. As we were leaving, we stumbled upon the most bizarre scene of the night. One of the waiters, a gay cross-dresser who was fully decked out in costume, was hooking up with a straight guy, and the girl who had been pining for said straight guy. It was a chaotic love triangle that defied explanation. Apparently, all 3 of them went home together. The aftermath? The girl lost her virginity to the gay guy. The straight guy lost his gay virginity to the gay guy. And the gay guy had his first ever experience with a woman. It was like a trashy Christmas miracle wrapped in a tornado of debauchery. Story 16. My car was rear-ended while I was stopped at a red light, which pushed my car into the vehicle in front of me. The rear end of my car was completely demolished, and the front was wrecked from the collision. When the police arrived, the 3 passengers in the front car suddenly developed severe whiplash and insisted they needed to be rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Meanwhile, I stood on the side of the road, perfectly fine, explaining to the officers what had happened. The at-fault driver tried to appeal, so I was summoned to court along with the 3 people from the front car. I showed up well-dressed and early. They arrived in casual clothes, apparently miraculously healed from their neck injuries. As the at-fault driver explained his side to the judge, the trio sat beside me, making loud, passive-aggressive comments and grunts of disapproval. They didn't even seem to recognize I was the person whose car had been totaled that day. To top it off, I noticed they'd swapped the identity of the driver with someone who had been sitting in the back seat at the time of the crash. It was obvious they were trying to milk the system for disability payments or insurance money. Meanwhile, I had lost my car entirely. It's honestly shocking how low some people will stoop for a quick payout. Story 17. During my 2nd or 3rd week working at a pawn shop, this guy started showing up daily trying to pawn some junkie tool for drug money. Every day, we told him we couldn't take it, and every day he left, only to return the next. One day he showed up completely drunk, with fresh track marks visible on his arms, and this time he brought gold. We tested it, of course, and it was fake. He had to wait for his ride, so he leaned on one of the saddles we had for sale to keep himself upright. He was wearing an unbuttoned shirt with nothing underneath and some very stained plaid shorts. As he leaned, his shorts started to slip down. I tried to look away, but it was like a car crash. I couldn't help but stare. Within seconds, his shorts fell completely down, revealing a massive, horrifyingly visible SJ stain all over his boxers and backside. What made it worse? He had zero shame. Instead of reacting or being embarrassed, he nonchalantly said, "Damn, why you yelling at me? A man's got to do what a man's got to do." He then pulled his pants up and walked straight into the parking lot in full view of a busy restaurant to wait for his ride. I see a lot of trashy things working at a pawn shop, but this moment definitely takes the cake. Story 18. I don't know if this counts as trashy or just plain sad. I was camping at a KOA in a one-room cabin sitting on the porch with my group. A woman and her son, who looked about 10 years old, pulled up to the cabin next to us. The kid was excited, chatting about camping and looking forward to watching a movie later that evening. They went inside and we could hear the boy having fun, playing with his toys. Around 6 p.m., when the movie was about to start, they came out of the cabin. The kid, a bit whiny, started yelling, "Come on, we're gonna miss the movie." The mom just sat on the porch, quietly ignoring him while he pulled and pushed at her, trying to get her to move. At first we thought, oh, she's doing some kind of passive resistance parenting technique. Nice. But then things got weird. The kid kept escalating, and finally the mom said, "Hold on just a minute," dropped her pants, and started peeing right there on the front porch of the cabin. It became very clear this wasn't about parenting. It was something else entirely. The kid started crying, yelling, "This never happens with Dad." Then, in an absolutely heartbreaking moment, he looked up at the sky and wailed, "I can't live like this." At that point, we decided to report her to the KOA employees. They came, confiscated 5 or 6 bottles of liquor, half of them empty, and took her car keys. They told her she'd be ejected the next morning once she was sober enough to drive. Sure enough, the next morning, we saw her and her son driving away in a car covered with ads for a tutoring center. It was one of the saddest and trashiest things I've ever witnessed. Story 19. The first and only time I attended a NASCAR race was at a newly opened track near us. My boyfriend had gotten free tickets and the day was going fine until it came time to leave. Because the track was new, the parking and exits weren't fully completed. Picture 180,000 people all trying to leave at once. Absolute chaos. It quickly turned into a massive traffic jam. As we sat in our little Geo Metro, we noticed a couple in the car ahead of us getting increasingly frustrated. They were honking, shouting, and generally making a scene. Their behavior caught the attention of the police, who came over to investigate. Things escalated quickly when the driver started cursing at the cops and flat out refused to cooperate. One officer asked the driver to step out of his car. Instead, the driver inched forward and tapped the cop with his car. That's when things went full sitcom mode. The cops moved fast, dragging the guy out of the car while his wife/common-law wife, whatever, jumped out, screaming, "Get off my man," and proceeded to jump on one of the cops' backs. We just sat there in stunned silence, watching this play out. Eventually, the couple got hauled off in handcuffs, and we had to give statements to the police. The incident even went to court months later. For reference, I have nothing against NASCAR or its fans. Everyone else at the event was perfectly well behaved, even during the parking mess. This one couple was the lone trashy exception. Story 20. Super late to the party, but here's a wild one. A friend told us that a guy we knew from school was back in town after 6 months in the Navy and suggested we all go out to celebrate. We were all about 19 at the time, living in Newcastle, a city well known for its wild nightlife. The night started out fairly standard and forgettable until around 2 a.m. when things took a turn. We were in a grimy bar nightclub when my mate tapped me on the shoulder, looking absolutely horrified, and pointed behind me. I turned around to see the Navy guy ripping open the tights of a girl right in the middle of the dance floor and proceeding to finger her in full view of everyone. They were drunkenly making out, or at least attempting to. Their heads kept clashing so violently that one or both of them ended up with a busted lip. Blood was smeared all over their faces as they continued slobbering all over each other like they were licking melting ice cream cones. To make things worse, the girl was, let's say, not very discreet or composed, and the guy wasn't exactly a prize either. A crowd of onlookers gathered around them, staring in either horrified disgust or morbid curiosity. At that point, we decided it might be best to intervene and get the Navy guy out of there before things got worse. Unfortunately, it wasn't over. The girl, who had apparently lost track of her friends, decided to follow us out into the street. One of my mates was so drunk, he wasn't fully aware of what was happening. So when the girl, bloodied and disheveled, with her tights still ripped open, started trying to stick her tongue in his mouth, he didn't resist much. This, of course, pissed off the Navy guy who started yelling at my mate for getting with his girl. Meanwhile, my mate just stood there with a vacant, drunken expression that screamed, "What the actual F is happening?" The girl burst into tears, and we all stood around, half drunk and half amused, watching the train wreck unfold. Eventually, we managed to calm everyone down and tried to get the girl back to her friends. When that failed, because she was far too drunk to tell us anything useful, we left her at one of the drunk rescue point cities in England, sometimes set up for situations like this, and called it a night. I haven't been on a night out with the Navy guy since, probably for the best. Story 21. This isn't a funny story, but it definitely fits the bill. I had a friend in elementary and middle school who was genuinely one of the sweetest people I've ever met. Unfortunately, her home life was awful and it showed. Her house was so filthy that everything she owned, her clothes, her backpack, everything smelled horrible. I never mentioned it, but plenty of other kids did, because kids can be cruel. Luckily for her, I was loud and obnoxious enough that people hated me more, which took some of the attention off her. I think that's why she felt comfortable around me. Even from the outside, her family was clearly a disaster. My mom wouldn't let me spend the night at her house and always insisted she come to ours instead. Years later, my mom admitted it was because she wanted my friend to have at least one quiet, clean night once in a while. One time, though, my mom let me stay over at her house. I wish I hadn't gone. The place was a nightmare. Animal feces everywhere, trash piled up, rotting food on the counters, and her dad's porn openly left on the computer. I didn't see it at the time, but years later, the house was so bad it had to be demolished instead of renovated. It even earned an infamous nickname in town. But the real trashiness wasn't just the state of the house. It was how they treated her. During dinner, her parents casually discussed which sibling they'd take in the divorce. It wasn't a joke. They were actually divorcing and debating who would be stuck with her. They both agreed the other parent should take her. It was like watching a twisted game of hot potato. Another time, for her birthday, we went to an amusement park. While she was in the bathroom, her mom started ranting to a group of 11-year-olds about how awful her daughter was. She said the most vile, hateful things you could imagine about a child. The other girls nodded along, probably out of fear. I know my friend heard everything. She was only a few feet away. To this day, I can't fathom how people can treat their own child like that. That family was trashy in every possible way. The only miracle was how my friend turned out to be such a sweet, kind person despite it all. Story 22. When I was a teenager, I got 160 hours of community service for some trouble I got into. I chose to serve my time at a donation store, organizing shelves and counting down the hours until my sentence was done. Most shifts were uneventful, aside from the occasional theft or public meltdown. Once, I even caught a man sniffing panties in the women's aisle. A few shifts in, I met a girl also doing community service. She was cute, though her attitude gave off a bit of a trashy vibe. We flirted a bit, and I figured it would make the hours pass faster. One day, while we were on a break sitting at a table in the back, she mentioned wanting to get out of her remaining hours. She stood up, walked to the store manager's office, and asked to have a private chat. A few moments later, the sounds of moaning and thumping started coming from the office. I turned around and saw her straddling the manager, completely unbothered that I could see them. For a second, I froze, unsure if I should leave or pretend I hadn't noticed. The manager eventually rolled his chair around to slam the office door shut. I finished my Lunchable and waited. Several minutes later, the girl walked out, grinning ear to ear, and said goodbye to me. Shortly after, the manager came out and asked how many hours I had left. He returned to his office and re-emerged with a stack of signed papers, marking my community service complete for the next 6 months. I walked out of the store that day with no intention of returning and never got the chance to thank that girl for unknowingly sparing me weeks of work. Story 23. One night, I found myself at the skeeziest bar in town with a group of friends. Among the regulars was a woman in her 20s, dancing with a comically small and utterly useless bandage on her foot. The bar's dirty floor only made it worse. Her bandage was soaked in blood, leaving bloody, muddy footprints all over the place. Despite this, she was having a great time, clearly out to party. She eventually made her way over to our group, hitting on a friend of my cousin's, someone we'd just met that night. As we talked to her, we found out she had smashed her foot through a glass coffee table before coming to the bar. Her reasoning? No big deal. Her foot was bleeding profusely, leaving small pools of blood. We urged her to go to the ER, or at least wrap her wound better, but she insisted it wasn't necessary. Eventually, the cousin's friend offered to drive her to the ER. She seemed oddly excited about this plan, and after a bit of back and forth, they headed to his car. A few minutes later, We decided to leave the bar and call the guy to tell him where we'd gone. As we approached the SUV we'd all arrived in, we heard moaning. Opening the door, we found them mid-act in the back seat. Her injured leg was over his shoulder, blood smeared everywhere. It looked like a crime scene with pools, splatters, and streaks of blood covering the car's interior. The guy yelled, "Give us 5 minutes!" while she shouted something about how it wasn't a big deal. Meanwhile, the SUV's owner, our friend, was losing his mind, screaming about his car being destroyed by STD foot blood. Before long, the police arrived, likely tipped off by the commotion. They drew their guns, thinking the blood-soaked man was being attacked. The woman, now mostly undressed, started screaming at everyone about privacy. After a chaotic few minutes, an EMT was called to treat her, and the guy snuck away in his own car during the commotion. He was later found and charged with destruction of property. My friend had to get the car professionally cleaned, but ended up selling it anyway. The footblood lovers stayed together for a few months after the incident, but by the time of the court hearing for the damages, they'd split. She reportedly showed no remorse and was still angry about the SUV's owner not wanting bodily fluids all over his car. Months later, I saw her at a grocery store, publicly making out with some new guy. I guess that ship had sailed. Story 24. I had an old flame, Mary, with whom I stayed on good terms. Over the years, we'd visit each other occasionally, hang out as friends, and sometimes I'd stay over. While I still had lingering feelings for her, I was moving on with my life and dating other people. Several times during our conversations, she'd interrupt me if I mentioned my current relationships, insisting I should have more regard for her feelings as my ex than to talk about other girlfriends. I respected her wishes and avoided the subject. The last time we met, we went out to a live music bar, had a few drinks, and got tipsy. That night, she invited 2 local guys back to her place. I was staying with her, so naturally I tagged along. One of the guys was pretty cool, and we chatted for a while. The other was obnoxious, crass, unsociable, and even made a comment about taking a framed photo of Mary into the bathroom for personal reasons. Mary, however, seemed unbothered by his behavior. At one point, she laid down on the carpet in the middle of the room, beckoned this guy over, and started making out with him right there on the floor, barely a meter away from me. This was the same woman who insisted I should consider her feelings when talking about my relationships. That moment completely changed how I saw her. Any lingering feelings I had disappeared, and after that night, we gradually stopped talking. I can pinpoint that exact moment as the end of any effort I made to keep our friendship alive. Story 25. I was driving through slow city traffic on a warm summer day, windows down and music on. While stopped at a light, I overheard an argument at a bus stop 2 lanes over. A man was yelling at a woman who had a little girl with her. The woman sat on one end of the bench looking weary and defeated, while the man paced and shouted. She was visibly pregnant, and the way they argued made it clear they were in some sort of toxic relationship. The child sat quietly at the opposite end of the bench, seemingly trying to stay out of it. The man dressed like a street version of Vanilla Ice, oversized basketball jersey, cocked cap, and sleeve tattoos. The woman wore simple, worn clothes that hinted at poverty. She looked sad, as if she'd endured this scenario countless times and knew her words wouldn't make a difference. As the light turned green, she stood up to address her child. She vented her frustration toward the little girl, likely as a way to release the tension. Then, just as I began to accelerate, I saw a blur of motion. The man had punched her. The sound of that punch, a brutal, meaty thud, is something I will never forget. I saw her stumble and fall to the ground, gasping in pain as the man continued yelling. By the time I fully processed what had happened, I was already through the intersection, driving away. I didn't stop, I didn't call for help, and I didn't turn back. For 7 years, I've lived with the guilt of doing nothing. I still drive past that bus stop occasionally and can't help but remember that moment. The fading advertisements on the bench feel like ghosts of that day. My inaction in the face of someone so clearly in need is the trashiest thing I've ever witnessed, and a choice I deeply regret. Story 26. My senior year of high school, 2001-2002, my friend Kevin decided we should celebrate our friend Turtle's 18th birthday by going to a strip club. None of us had ever been, and Kevin assured us it would be a great idea. Spoiler, it wasn't. The place we went to was less of a club and more of a strip shack. Not classy at all. It was a Friday night, and there were only 2 dancers working. The first girl had a fresh C-section incision, still with stitches. She didn't so much dance as sway awkwardly, clearly in pain. After a few minutes, her breast milk started leaking and running down her front. She promptly left the stage. Then came dancer number 2. She looked strung out with arms full of track marks. She kept messing with her thong, adjusting it repeatedly. Eventually, we realized the issue. She had a tampon in, and it was irritating her. Where we live, it's technically against the law for dancers to remove their bottoms, but that didn't stop her. Within 3 minutes, she had flashed us her vag at least 20 times while fidgeting with the tampon. Finally, she gave up, pulled it out on stage, and flung it over our heads into a trash can behind us. 3 of us were absolutely speechless and disgusted. Kevin, however, loved every second of it and couldn't understand why we wanted to leave. That Monday, Turtle told us he was coming out of the closet. While he probably would have come out eventually, we're pretty sure that night sealed the deal. I've never been back to a strip club since, and even refused to go to one for my bachelor party. Story 27. When I was a sophomore in high school, I worked as the pool boy for my neighborhood. One morning, while I was cleaning the pool, the classy, meth-head-looking woman from the neighborhood was out smoking a cigarette and talking on her phone. I tried to avoid her, but as I worked my way around the pool, I couldn't help but notice her behavior. From a distance, I saw her picking at the butt of her bathing suit, sniffing whatever she found, and then flicking it away repeatedly. Gross, but it got worse. As I got closer, I overheard her phone conversation. She was dirty talking to someone, saying things like, "I can't wait till you F me raw later. You better eat my cooch like a McRib." Horrified, I started to walk away, but not before hearing her take a big, wet sniff and hack up a giant loogie. I turned just in time to see the green mass sailing through the air and landing right in the pool I had just cleaned. I stood there, staring at the floating phlegm, trying to process what had just happened. Later that day, I told my boss. At first, he couldn't believe me, but then he started laughing so hard he was crying, tears dripping off his cheap sunglasses. I didn't find it as funny, though. Story 28. Here's the bar story I've shared before, still wild every time I think about it. Last night, I witnessed 2 girls aggressively making out at a bar, but it wasn't the hot scene you'd expect. It was messy and chaotic, and things escalated quickly. Let's dive in. After the makeout session ended, one of the girls, the taller one, let's call her Sarah, wandered over to our table. She was absolutely wasted, like white girl wasted levels of drunk. She draped her arms over me and my friend Kara, a girl sitting next to me, and groaned, "I'm so horny right now." Things got weird fast. Sarah turned her attention to Kara, trying to drunkenly flirt and smooth talk her. Kara, not wanting to deal with it, excused herself to the restroom. But Sarah wasn't about to let her go. She chased Kara into the bathroom and crawled under the stall door to corner her. At this point, I'm just sitting at the table thinking, this chick just crawled on a bar bathroom floor. That's next level gross. When Kara eventually came back out, Sarah was right behind her, topless and barefoot, her shoes and shirt nowhere to be found. Her breasts were fully out, and she looked like a complete train wreck. I was dying laughing at the absurdity of it all. Trying to keep things under control, I told Sarah to put her top back on and clean herself up. She looked at me, completely serious, and shouted, "I'm from Middletown, don't F with me." For context, Middletown is a notoriously trashy city in Ohio. I replied, "Darling, nobody is trying to F with you, we're trying to get you the F out." In response, she grabbed my neck and tried to kiss me. I pushed her off and she fell to the floor, where she immediately started crying. Nobody cared because it was obvious I was just trying to get her to calm down. Finally, Sarah got up, stormed out into the rainy night, and disappeared. None of us ever saw her again. Story 29. When I was in college, high school in the UK, my school had a gross, man-made pond. One day, one of the better skaters in our group decided he could make some money by jumping over it on his skateboard. So we set up a kind of proto-Kickstarter, before the internet made it a thing, and raised about 30 pounds in loose change for him to attempt the stunt. He succeeded, and we all had a blast watching him pull it off. However, the idea inspired 2 scrawny punkish guys, who weren't skaters, to start their own stunts, only theirs were significantly trashier. With no skating skills to offer, they began doing increasingly disgusting or ridiculous challenges for small bounties. For example, they licked 30 centimeters of the dirtiest carpet imaginable for £4 27 pence, drank each other's piss for £6 and 2 loose cigarettes, performed the helicopter, you can imagine, in class for £9 40 pence, stuck a rose in a rather unfortunate place, took a chili pepper Annalie in the college quad. Eventually, one of them got expelled, not for the stunts, but simply for skipping too many classes. He later turned this trashy hobby into a career. Years later, I ran into him at a pub and bought him a drink. He told me he'd been paid to attend certain parties thrown by wealthy or important straight men about 20 years ago. Now he's paranoid that the government might be after him because of what he knows from those parties. It was one of the strangest life paths I've ever witnessed. Story 30. One late evening, before heading home, I asked a waiter at a closing restaurant if I could use the restroom. It was a long ride home, and I didn't want to risk it. As I approached the bathroom, I heard moaning coming from the women's restroom. For a moment, I considered holding it in and just leaving, but the urgency of the situation forced me to go in and handle my business quickly. As I was in the men's room, the moaning got louder and more intense. I tried to finish as fast as possible, but before I could leave, the sounds abruptly stopped. As I exited, a man came rushing around the corner, pants unzipped, his equipment still out, visibly hard and covered in evidence. Clearly, he was trying to make a quick dash from the women's room to the men's, likely assuming no one else was around. Unfortunately, I accidentally locked eyes with him before quickly looking away. To make matters worse, I realized from his clothes that this was the boss of the restaurant. Presumably, he had been having an affair with one of the waitresses. I used to like that place. They had great beer at affordable prices, but I couldn't bring myself to return after that awkward and unsanitary encounter. Story 31. A childhood friend of mine came to stay with my wife and me, bringing along his newborn son. He had recently broken up with the baby's mother, a woman he described as a dumb-as-rocks crack baby. Sadly, that wasn't an insult but a fact, as her biological mother had used crack during her pregnancy. He stayed with us for a week, explaining that things weren't going well with her. My wife and I generously offered to let him stay longer to get back on his feet. However, things quickly went sideways. By November, his girlfriend had joined him, claiming they were trying to work things out and needed a place to stay. They promised to pay rent and utilities, but nothing ever materialized. From November to February, they claimed they were job hunting but found nothing. They lived off food stamps but spent them on junk food from the nearby 7-Eleven instead of buying proper food for their baby. The baby's mother was a nightmare. She constantly messed with me emotionally, frequently saying things like, "Your elderly pet rat is going to die soon." She would scream at her baby to shut the F up and ignore his cries while the dad played PlayStation, and she did God knows what. Eventually, we'd had enough and gave them 1 week to move out. They didn't take us seriously and didn't pack a thing. When we forced them out, they tried to intimidate us, claiming they had rights and threatening legal action. I told them to go ahead. I could afford better representation and would make sure the court took their child due to their neglect. That shut them up quickly. After they left, the unfortunate task of cleaning out their room fell on my wife and her best friend. They found months-old food containers, loose pills scattered where the baby could have easily reached them, and horrifyingly, a bloody tampon left on the floor. The final insult? 7 cans of baby formula repurposed as urine containers, all lidless and spilling everywhere. It was the most disgusting, trashy experience of my life. Needless to say, I cut them out completely. My wife and I got married in June, and this guy had the audacity to send me a congratulatory message on Facebook. I deleted it and blocked him without a second thought. Good riddance. Story 32. I was once out at a work lunch with 2 coworkers and our CEO. It was a casual outing for our small, tight-knit company. After grabbing some burgers, we started walking back to the office through a main downtown intersection. As we crossed the street and approached an alleyway we needed to pass through, my mind was more focused on traffic and surroundings than on the conversation my coworker was having with the CEO. This particular alley was always unpleasant, lined with old brick walls, scraggly bushes, cigarette butts, and empty bottles of cheap alcohol. Just as we were about to step into the alley, my CEO put his arm out to stop us, looking straight ahead with an expression I couldn't quite read. Curious, I followed his gaze. What we saw left us standing there in stunned silence. A homeless woman, ragged and clearly drunk, was semi-bent over with her pants pulled down just above her knees. Without a care in the world, she started peeing, straight into her pants. We watched, frozen as the puddle grew beneath her. The smell hit us almost immediately, and it was overwhelming. My CEO started to look physically ill, turning green as the seconds dragged on. She didn't seem to notice or care that we were there watching this surreal scene. After what felt like an eternity, she casually pulled up her pants, completely soaked, and shuffled off without a word. Without hesitation, we took the long way back to the office, none of us saying a single thing about what had just happened. Story 33. Finally, a chance to share this one. In college, a girl, let's call her T, invited me to a party. I worked late that night, so by the time I got there, it was already well underway. The party was at the sketchiest trailer house I'd ever seen. When I walked in, T and her friend Kay were completely naked and drunk out of their minds. The rest of the party consisted of me, another guy our age, Kay's one-legged dad sitting in a recliner making inappropriate comments about how his daughter looked naked, and a toddler running around in nothing but a diaper. T made it clear she wanted to sleep with me, and the other guy was supposedly there for Kay, but he seemed more interested in T. All night, he kept trying to pick a fight with me because T was into me, and he wasn't happy about it. At one point, he took Kay outside and had sex with her on the porch. Meanwhile, T took me to a bedroom and started to go down on me. At first, I went along with it because, to be honest, T was gorgeous, but then her toddler walked into the room. I immediately told her to stop, but she brushed it off, saying, "It's fine, she won't remember." That was the moment I was officially ready to leave. The night ended with me holding T's hair while she vomited, giving her a shower, and putting both her and Kay to bed. I even ended up driving the other guy home because he was too drunk to drive himself. The cherry on top? A week later, I got a call from the health department telling me I should get tested for the clap. Luckily, I came out clean, but that night is permanently burned into my memory as one of the most bizarre and trashy experiences I've ever had. Story 34. I spent 4 years in the military stationed in Germany, sharing a room with a 6'7" black guy. German girls love American black dudes, and my roommate was like a magnet. He wasn't quite used to the attention, being a bit socially awkward, but he was cool, and we got along great. One year during Oktoberfest in Munich, a Turkish girl wearing an I Love NY shirt ran up to us and practically threw herself on him. She was determined to outdo someone else in what seemed to be a very trashy bet. Our German friend translated her words. "I have to prove I'm a bigger whore. Whores must be paid. I will suck your D for..." She then looked around and said, "A bag of roasted peanuts." Being the supportive friend I was, I bought a pack of peanuts. The 5 of us headed behind the porta potties, where she knelt in a mix of mud and urine to fulfill her end of the deal. Her friend and I stood nearby, eating the peanuts like we were watching a bad porno. Halfway through, she gagged and said something to her friend, who translated it as, "Does this mean I win the bet? His D tastes like sheep." The entire scene was surreal. Her friend and I watched with detached curiosity, while the saddest blowjob in history stumbled to its conclusion. Later, on the train back to base, we saw her again, this time with 2 other guys. She went to the back of the train car, where she proceeded to have sex with one and give a blowjob to the other, while her same sad friend watched glassy-eyed. I turned to my buddy and said, "You might as well have stuck your D in a sewer." From that day forward, we called him Sewer D. If you're reading this, I miss you, Sewer D. You were a cool dude. Story 35. Here's my second paramedic story, and this one involves a wild animal. The police got called to a domestic disturbance between a prostitute and her client over a payment dispute. Things escalated, and during the scuffle, the prostitute cut open a varicose vein on her foot, causing a lot of bleeding. The cops called us to evaluate and treat her. When we arrived, I stayed behind to chat with the cops while my rookie partner went to bandage the woman's foot. Years of her lifestyle had clearly taken a toll because as my partner knelt in front of her to wrap her foot, she suddenly let loose a stream of urine all over his uniform and boots. He shouted, "Did you just piss on me?" She replied, "Sorry, honey, and if I were you, I'd get checked out, because even I don't know what I got." As my partner tried to clean himself up, I loaded the woman into our truck. But before we could drive off, I turned around to see a wild turkey standing between me and the door. The turkey started squawking and advancing toward us. One of the locals commented, "That turkey don't like cops." After a few tense minutes of trying to dodge the turkey, it jumped into the truck. At that point, my partner was covered in crack whore piss. I was cornered in the truck with said crack whore and a turkey, and the cops were outside attempting to engage the bird in hand-to-beak combat to rescue me. It was the most bizarre standoff I've ever been part of. Story 36. Last summer, I was in an Uber with my friends Jenny and Kyle, heading from the city center to the outer districts. We could have taken the subway for a fraction of the cost, but Jenny insisted on the Uber and said she'd pay for it. So we agreed. I was in the front seat while Jenny and Kyle were in the back. About 10 minutes into the ride, I heard Jenny stop making out with Kyle and say, "I know you have a girlfriend, so like, are you doing this because you're sleazy or because I'm just so pretty you can't control yourself?" She even did a dramatic hair flip. Kyle responded with, "Hey, you're just so pretty." Jenny pressed further. "Prettier than her?" At this point, my eyes rolled so hard I practically got a headache. Kyle said, "Yeah," and they resumed making out. 20 minutes later, the kissing sound stopped, and I started hearing something different. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a zipper. My stomach dropped. No, this cannot be happening. I told myself I was imagining it, but I couldn't stop myself from looking back. Sure enough, there was Kyle, and Jenny was giving him roadhead in a goddamn Uber. I wanted to scream, but was too afraid of getting us kicked out of the car, so I bit my tongue and just hoped she wouldn't accidentally bite him. When we finally got to our apartment, the driver either didn't notice or just didn't care. Then Jenny, who had insisted on the Uber, saw the $60 bill and refused to pay for it. She made Kyle cover the cost instead. Later that night, as if things couldn't get trashier, they ended up having sex on the main staircase of the apartment building. Story 37. One time, we went out to dinner with my ex-husband's extended family, which included his parents, brother, and a family of 4 relatives who also brought along the wife's mom, who was visiting. This family of 4 wasted no time proving how trashy they were. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu and acted sarcastic and rude to the waiter. They even managed to get a free soup that didn't come with their specific entree, all while being overly demanding and micromanaging the staff. In the restaurant business, whoever does most of the talking with the servers usually signals they'll be paying the bill. Of course, this family had no intention of footing the bill. They knew my ex-husband and I were covering it. Here's the kicker. As we were all getting up to leave, I noticed the wife and her mom stuffing cloth napkins into their purses. Yes, cloth napkins. Not content with that, they also packed up every bit of their leftovers, lobster, crab legs, and all, so they could have a luxury breakfast the next day. I thought asking for free samples of cosmetics was trashy, but this really took the cake. Story 38. NYC subway 1, 2, or 3 line. A woman entered the car, and with her came an invisible cloud of reek, a pungent mix of filth and desperation. She promptly lit up a crack pipe, took a hit, and offered to share it with me. I politely declined, as did everyone else when she continued down the car, extending the offer to other passengers. She soon found a spot between 2 men sitting with large pieces of luggage. She squatted right there, directly between them, and began to pee through her yoga pants. The men fled instantly, and her urine spread across the subway car floor, guided by the train's vibrations, streaming toward the end of the car where everyone had huddled to escape her. Then came the final act. She took another hit from her crack pipe and squatted again. This time, no urine emerged. Instead, something horrifying began to take shape, a long cylinder running down the inner thigh of her yoga pants. We all stared in horrified silence, silently begging reality to be kinder than what our eyes suggested. But no, she reached into her pants, down past her crotch, and fished out a fresh turd. I'll never forget that moment. The sun has shined a little less brightly for me ever since. Story 39. At a music festival in the UK, my friends and I had made a little circle of tents with an open clearing in the middle for sitting and drinking. Around 7 a.m., we were all woken by an ungodly noise, something akin to a warthog being stabbed. Confused, my friends and I started shouting to each other from inside our tents, asking, "What the hell is that noise?" Braving the chaos, I unzipped the front of my tent to investigate. To my horror, I was greeted with a very close view of a vagina. One of our group, a guy we all knew was a bit unhinged, had pulled a woman at the festival and decided the middle of our tent circle was the perfect spot for some public pleasure. She was bent over directly in front of my tent, and he was enthusiastically jamming his fingers inside her while his man missile pointed directly at me. I zipped the tent back up as quickly as I could and crawled to the back of my tent to crack open a bottle of whiskey in an attempt to erase the memory. Meanwhile, they carried on their intimate activities in the middle of our tent circle, unbothered by the fact that we were all trapped inside, unwilling witnesses. Later in the festival, their antics escalated. They decided it would be a great idea to have sex in the middle of a Black Dahlia murder mosh pit. The madness climaxed when he was dragged into a wall of death with his trousers still around his ankles. Apparently, there are still videos of the incident floating around YouTube, a testament to their uniquely trashy festival legacy. Story 40. Working at a bar in a college town, I've seen my fair share of wild and trashy moments, flashing, fights, drugs, and everything in between. But one particular night takes the cake. It was a slow evening, and only my bar manager, Jake, and I were closing. At the bar, we had a classic third-wheel situation. A guy and girl were hammered and flirting heavily, while their soberish female friend acted as their watchdog. At one point, the sober friend got up to use the restroom, and the other 2 wasted no time. They were all over each other within seconds. This wasn't unusual, so Jake and I just kept going about our closing duties, wiping the bar tops, cleaning the wells, and so on. Things took a turn when Jake walked around the bar to start stacking stools. He got about 5 feet from the couple before stopping in his tracks. He calmly approached them and tried to help them gather their stuff, as if they'd had too much to drink and were just being messy. When Jake came back, he leaned in and told me what was really happening. The girl had her underwear around her ankles, and the guy was drunkenly trying to make use of his semi-hard-on. Apparently, they were attempting to get it on right there at the bar. Right as Jake finished telling me, the sober friend came back, saw the situation, and quickly escorted them out of the bar. We absolutely lost it laughing after they left. It's now one of the go-to stories we tell whenever someone asks about the craziest thing we've seen. Story 41. I used to be a lifeguard at a notoriously trashy water park. The hot tub was especially infamous for being a hot spot, literally, for questionable behavior. To paint a picture, the hot tub was shaped like a giant donut with an island in the middle that had seating all around its edges. One day I was sitting on my trusty bucket. Yes, we sat on actual buckets, when I noticed a couple sitting on the island with their backs to me. Typically, we'd walk around every so often to check for blind spots, so I got up and started making my round. As I walked around the edge of the hot tub, I finally got a clear view of what they were doing. The girl had her hand down the guy's pants and was furiously giving him a hot tub rub job. The best part? They had absolutely no idea that I was now standing directly in front of them in full view of their little escapade. I blew my whistle harder than I ever had before and followed it up with a loud, "Ma'am, could you please remove your hand from that guy's pants and exit the hot tub?" To this day, that moment remains one of the trashiest things I've witnessed. Though sadly, it wasn't the grossest thing to ever happen at that water park. It was just the most memorable. Story 42. The trashiest day I've ever experienced started with almost being forced to do cocaine and ended with a guy getting a pumpkin smashed over his head. It happened a couple of years ago, during the fall near Halloween. I was working for an oil and gas company in Denver, specifically in a division that sold drill bits. We had an important client, a rig manager from North Dakota, who could easily bring in $1 million a month in drill bit sales when his rigs were up and running. So keeping him happy was a high priority. We started the day by taking him and his friends go-karting. We drank beer, ate pizza, and had a good time. He seemed like a cool guy at first. Later, we agreed to meet up again after cleaning up to head to a bar near Coors Field. At the bar, we spent hours drinking and playing cornhole. His wife, her friend, and their guy friend were getting hammered and acting chatty. Then they disappeared for a while. When we were finally wrapping up, the client, now completely trashed, dropped a bombshell. He wanted us to go back to his apartment to do cocaine with him. My coworker and I politely declined. That's when he lost it. He started yelling, saying that if we didn't come with him and do coke, he would never buy another drill bit from us again. This wasn't just a threat. It was a $12,000 per year account. He was basically blackmailing us into snorting cocaine. As he was about to escalate further, chaos erupted outside. We heard yelling and screaming, and it turned out his wife, her friend, and the other guy were getting kicked out of the bar for doing cocaine in the bathrooms. The wife was fighting the security guards as they escorted her out. The client ran after her, leaving us an opening to escape. My coworker and I finished paying the tab and left on the opposite side of the bar, dodging Coke Man entirely. Relieved to be free of that mess, we got a text from some other clients, rig hands from Alaska, who invited us to meet them at a different bar. We figured it couldn't get any worse, so we agreed. This bar turned out to be even trashier. We sat drinking pitcher after pitcher of cheap Coors, watching as a group of 5 Alaskan rig hands started eyeing a hot girl with her boyfriend. They were loudly talking about how the boyfriend was a little bee and how she deserved a real man. Before I could fully process what was happening, one of the guys picked up a decorative pumpkin from the bar and smashed it over the boyfriend's head. The group then jumped him, beating him up while his terrified girlfriend screamed. As the scuffle dragged on and people rushed to break it up, I decided I'd had enough. It was 3 a.m., and I'd been drinking since morning. I called a taxi and went home, still reeling from the sheer absurdity of the day. Between being blackmailed into doing cocaine or losing millions of dollars in revenue, and witnessing drunk Alaskans turning a pumpkin into a weapon, that Friday was the trashiest day of my life. I don't miss the industry. They drink way too much.